Good morning, everybody. I'll kick things off at 12. Hopefully you can hear me. If anybody in the audience wants to jump on the chat and just give us a thumbs up, that would be great. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second attempt at how's the tech market in the UK changed in 2022. Those of you that tried last Thursday to jump on this, and there were plenty of you, my abject apologies that we had a few technical issues. I'm hoping they haven't recurred, and we will be doing a full recording of this if there is any problems anyway, and send them out to you. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Zoe McFarlane, who is the head of data insights for StepStone, and Kimberley Cook, who is a software engineer and director of CodeBar. Before we start, Kim, do you just want to jump in and tell us a little bit more about CodeBar?
Yeah, firstly, thank you so much for having me today. So CodeBar is a charity and we run free programming workshops for minority group members in tech. We started running workshops in London in October 2013, and since then we've taught over 16,000 people to code.
Brilliant, very impressive. Now, this entire LinkedIn Live session is in response to a webinar we did 3 weeks ago, where we had a lot of questions come in, and due to my ill discipline within the presentation, we ran out of time at the end. So we thought, well, why not invite people back, go through in a little bit more of a considered way of the questions. But before we do that, I think it's well worth Zoe running through a very shortened version of the webinar that we ran through, just to set the scene, and then we can jump into the questions. But Zoe, would you like to take the reins and whack through the highlights of the presentation previously?
Thanks, Dom. Yeah, so as you say, we'll quickly whiz through some of the key findings from that webinar. So, without any further ado, just starting out and looking initially at the tech hiring demand that we're seeing across the market and across CWJobs specifically, in particular, comparing here, looking at kind of 2021 versus 2022. So what we're looking at on the left-hand side is the average amount of applications per vacancy in half one of this year versus half one of last year. What's really positive to see is that large uplift in applications per vacancy. We've seen a really steady level of applications, and that steady increase as we've moved month on month through the year. And actually, while we don't have the tail end of the year on here, we have continued to see that as we've moved throughout. So we're seeing candidate activity is starting to return a little bit back to normal in terms of the trends that we would expect to see on a yearly basis, albeit higher in terms of job postings and application numbers than we would have typically seen pre-pandemic. You can see some of the core stats on the right-hand side of the slide there. So, for example, that 67% uplift in average applications per vacancy on CWJobs compared to this time last year. We've also really seen applications per vacancy for specialist roles, for more specific roles, rising across the course of this year as well. So seeing, for example, as we see on the slide, a 211% year-on-year uplift for network analysis. For business intelligence, we see that also over 200%. Web design and software development, both over 150% increase as well. And even though London and the Southeast is really dominant in terms of postings and applications, what we're seeing is other regions are bouncing back with that remote working and that flexible working as well. So we can see that East Anglia is up 161% year on year. The East Midlands is up 106%, for example. Yorkshire just shy of 90%. So it's really positive to see in terms of some of that talent beginning to spread out a little bit more equally across the UK there as well. So moving on and having a look at what this looks like from a sub-discipline level. If we look on the left-hand side, we're looking at the top sub-disciplines within IT, so the biggest areas that we saw from a posting perspective across the UK market in 2021 through 2022 from that postings perspective. And obviously we're still seeing software development as incredibly dominant, but it is also behaving in a really stable way as we move across that period. We've seen infrastructure and support being those second and third largest sub-disciplines, and while they have kind of slightly decreased, what we're seeing is that gap is now being made up by organizations, by companies looking at core skills that are simply, kind of must-have from a key skills perspective. So database, web development, and architecture are some of the sub-disciplines that have really grown over the past year or so as well. If we look at the right hand side at what's happening on CWJobs specifically from a posting and from an applications perspective, we look at something that we call an ADLO, so an average daily listing online. Essentially, it's on a given day when you jump onto CWJobs, how many jobs can you expect to see in that given area on average? So what we've seen is kind of training, management, network analysis in particular have leapt up over the course of the last year. But what's interesting, or something I find interesting, is that when you look at what's jumped up from an application volume perspective, it's a little bit different. So we're seeing software development still very much growing in comparison to those job postings. Business intelligence as well are really where we're seeing a lot of candidate activity and candidate interest there as well. If we flip on then and look at this in terms of kind of, most posted roles versus most applied to roles, we can see this coming through again there. So on the left-hand side, the first half of 2022 looks really similar to what we saw in 2021. So Java developer, DevOps, .NET, data engineers, for example, we're still seeing extremely high job posting volumes. The only real area from a posting perspective we've seen quite a large spike is in the business analyst area across the course of 2022. But if you look across to the right hand side, you can really see that difference in application volumes across the board there. So candidates are being more granular in terms of what they're searching for. So if we were to take the top 10 job postings from a candidate search perspective, gone really are the days of people searching for umbrella terms like software dev or software engineer. We're seeing people searching significantly more now around skills or coding ability rather than job titles. If we take a dive then and look at what this looks like from a regional perspective, again, for those applications and for those average daily listings online. So as I said previously, London and the Southeast are, of course, still incredibly dominant. London accounts for 73% of all applications, but interesting, actually, only 44% of postings in the market. So really similar proportion to what we saw last year, where there's significantly higher demand for these roles based in sort of London and the Southeast compared to the amount of supply that organizations are putting out there. But what we can actually see is that even though, as I say, that those organizations are looking to move outside of the Southeast, one of the big trends that we've seen coming through is talking around roles being based in particular locations when actually they're only based there for a single day a fortnight or a single day a month or a couple of days a quarter, for example. So it's a much more attractive proposition when we know that candidates and workers are looking for that remote and flexible piece as well, which is why we believe we're still seeing that application draw through to London, even though companies are looking to kind of move it further afield as well. And then finally, just looking at what we see from a change in search perspective. So I mentioned that kind of granularity of what people are looking for from a job title perspective. But what we're actually looking at here is the number of generic job searches versus the number of IT job searches from the beginning of 2019 through to the first half of 2022. Obviously, we're not implying that there are more searches for IT jobs than any other jobs in the market. But if we think about that 100% mark as the most number of searches that have been done by candidates, and then everything else is a percentage of that 100%, what we're seeing is that from a bounce back and a 2022 boom perspective, tech roles, IT roles have come back online again from a candidate popularity perspective in a way that generic roles simply haven't. They've stayed significantly more deflated compared to that pre-pandemic period. And again, if we look on the right-hand side, we can see the search terms and how candidates are being more specific in those searches, as opposed to maybe looking for umbrella job titles or brands, as we mentioned there before.
So
But
Zoe,
really key. Oh, yeah, go on.
that point, I mean, to me, that just says that there's a lot more window shopping being done
Mm-hmm.
by tech candidates at the moment than there is generally,
Yeah.
which is a great opportunity for people that want to advertise to ensnare them and get them to actually apply. So that's a real positive, I think, and maybe going under the radar, because
Mm-hmm.
obviously we all know how difficult it is to recruit tech talent and assume that people aren't looking, but that would indicate that people are definitely looking. They're just waiting for the right job.
Yeah.
I think every developer I know always has their eyes, just always looking. And like you said, window shopping all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. So I'm really, really keen to save obviously the lion's share of this session for those questions from the webinar a few weeks ago and from any questions that come through today. But just a quick flag, if you did want to dive into any of the insights in more detail, you can access it via that kind of link on the screen there from the Tech Hiring Insider, but also the kind of wealth of recruiter specific resources that we have across the CWJobs site to support support and inform some of those hiring strategies there as well. So Dom, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hand over to you for
Okay.
some of those questions.
Excellent. And obviously, if there's anybody out there in the audience that has any questions, please put them into the chat, and they will hopefully get through to me. So we have plenty of questions here. Previously, we only had Kim for half an hour, so we kind of front loaded the session with all the questions for her. But I think we'll try and go round robin so she can draw breath at some point. But we will definitely start off with Kim. So Kim, first question: apart from salaries, what else seems to be the driving expectation from candidates?
Oh, that's a great question. I think from my experience and the experience of the people that I know, because that's all I can talk about, is flexibility is key. And whether that's being able to work from home for a couple of days a week or 100%, or whether that's flexibility in hours so that they can say take their kids to school or pick their kids up from school, or if someone's a carer, they can have that flexibility because, they maybe have quite a lot of doctors and hospital appointments. So when I say flexibility, I think it falls under those two brackets, remoteness, flexibility of where you can work from, but also flexibility of when you can work as well. And the big driver for that was the pandemic. Before that, people weren't used to working from home. People didn't know what life could be like if you gained that extra hour and a half that you used to spend on the tube. And now we've had a taster for that. I want that in my life. I want to gain that hour and a half, a day so that, I can maybe do a bit of yoga in the morning or walk my dog, and that is the thing that I'm seeing the most. I even spoke to a friend recently who took a bit of a pay cut because they wanted to go down to a 4-day week because they wanted to enjoy their life more. Again, with the pandemic, a lot of people lost loved ones. And they've realised that life is too short to be necessarily working all the time. And so for them, salary was like a their second thing. They were like, I'm happy to take a pay cut because I want to do a 4-day week. And again, that flexibility was key for them. So from my experience and what I'm seeing from friends, particularly software developer friends who are in the industry, flexibility is key.
Yeah, good point. And I think it bears reiteration that, and you made this point, Zoe, at the in-house recruitment live event we were at in Bristol a couple of weeks ago, that flexible working and remote working are remote working could be part of flexible working, but flexible working means a lot more other things as well. And I think it's really important to clarify what you mean by flexible working, because flexible working and remote working, I know they're different, but the actual applicant may have very, very set opinion on, no, it's actually hours, or they may assume that flexible working just means remote working. So I think, you made that point in Bristol, didn't you?
I think what we see from the data is that probably 18, 24 months ago, including words like flexibility or flexible in job adverts did really help to get people to apply. What we see is that it almost makes no difference now, because either, as you say, people will base what they think that means based off what they want to see from flexibility, or the even more dangerous kind of assumption trap there is they're going to base it on what they think you probably mean, which could be that you're completely aligned actually, but they've made an assumption about your organization that means they feel that they aren't. So where we see organizations being really, really crystal clear about defining flexibility for them is where people are winning and getting that relevancy in the eyes of the candidates as well.
Yeah, and I think you can be really clear, in the job ad, so that, like you said, there's none of this, oh, I assumed this, or, the company being like, well, of course we meant that. I was speaking to, again, like another friend recently, and they said, their core hours are 11 till 4, but others around, no, I think it was actually 11 till 3. And that was always when they knew there would be meetings. But the rest of the time, they could work whenever they wanted, and that again suits someone who's, maybe more of a morning person, or someone who's more of an evening person. You can have that flexibility. And they said that that was very crystal clear in the job ad, that these are the core hours, but otherwise, you can be flexible when you do the other, 4 hours. And I thought that was really great. Exactly like you said, like there was no confusion around what they meant with flexible. It was very, very clear in the job ad.
And that clarity point really goes back to what you were talking about, drilled down searches, Zoe, doesn't it? In terms of, so there's a double win on it. If you're clear with everything that's in the job advert, and it may take another 20 minutes, 30 minutes of sub editing, as it were, just to make sure that although you've spent 2 hours crafting it, that passing it over to somebody else and then asking them what they understand from that, because it will save you potentially a lot of time in the future and heartache when you've gone through a 3-stage interview and then, oh no, I thought that, and it's all falls to pieces. So I think that clarity is definitely a key word, a key guidance in when advertising these roles. Okay, on that point of remote working, is there some concrete data, Zoe, that you would say shows that remote roles are filled quicker than hybrid stroke office based?
So not hugely, actually, which I'm always a bit surprised about when we look at it. But what we previously saw was that this was the case. You'd expect to kind of get higher application volumes. But what we've seen actually is that particularly within tech, there's been a decline in candidates searching for remote roles specifically. It appears to be more of a given within the tech space now, or more of an assumption from the candidate that something like that will be available. What's really, really challenging in terms of concrete data to show actually, should we be fully office based? Should we be fully remote? Should we be hybrid? Is that there's so many factors that go into whether advertising gets an application or not, right? From the company's brand to its PR presence in the news over the past kind of months, to its location, to the job title. But what we do see is there's not a huge jump in application to roles that flag themselves as remote. And we've kind of done A/B testing with some of our larger clients actually to say, talk about it on these ones and don't talk about it on these ones. And it seems to be much more to do with the skills that people are looking. I know when we did the webinar a few weeks ago, Kimberley, we were talking about the fact that actually what's a nice to have and what's a must have. And actually the biggest driver that we're seeing in terms of pushing those applications in the tech space is where you can really reflect and say, I'm only going to put must have if I'm literally unable to fill this role if this person doesn't have this experience already. I'm pushing things over much more to the nice to have, to the, maybe it requires some training, maybe it requires kind of lateral learning from colleagues, coaching, whatever that is. That's the biggest piece that we're seeing drive the applications over that remote piece, because it just seems to be a given, as I say. So we know 1 in 2 workers want those flexible working options. We've talked about, being really, really clear about what that means. But frustratingly, no, there is no concrete data to show that. I think it's part of the wider approach, and considering actually, how can you approach it from that skills perspective as opposed to an arbitrary checklist perspective seems to be what's now driving the applications and ticking the candidates' boxes.
Because some previous research we've done as well has said that the lack of a long list of qualifications is one of the biggest turn-offs, isn't it? So now, obviously, you want a qualified person for your role, but if there's nice to haves and you put them in the kind of must-have column, that is going to be a massive turn-off. So again, that discipline and clarity of how you present that role. There's a long list, and it's not easy, especially when you start thinking about social media. And yeah, if you can just do that in 260 characters, that'd be fine. Lots to add in.
It's amazing because through our job board, it's obviously through the CodeBar job board, it's often something that we question, exactly like you said, Zoe, when we get a job ad and there's like 10 must-haves. And then I just go, are all those must-haves? And they're like, oh, no, 2 are. And I'm like, okay, well, every single must-have that you add, take off X number of candidates. And if you've got 10, how many people are you potentially losing because you've got this long list of must-haves? And I read a stat recently that was, I think it's something like women will see these things and think that they have to do all of them in order to apply for the job, whereas a man will see and go, oh, I can do 3 of those, I'll apply. And so, particularly if you're wanting to make your team more diverse, the job ad is so crucial, because that job ad alone could be putting off so many people, whether it is the must-haves that you have or the qualification. Some of the best developers I've worked with have been self-taught. If you're a self-taught developer, the amount of focus and motivation that goes into becoming a developer is incredible, because you've done it by yourself. So you are losing out on so much amazing talent if you add that into your job ad. And, terminology is another thing. If the terminology in your job ad, has certain things in it, like myself, if I see something that's like, oh, I want a rock star developer, it's cringy. I'm not going to want to apply. And so the job ad and the wording and so many things is so key. Even like the perks, like if you want to list perks on your job ad, be careful about what perks you add, because that it could be doing more damage depending on what the perk is. Like, I don't want a perk that's like, free alcohol every Friday after work. Like, that's not a job perk. Like, so again, that's another thing in the job ad that could be causing you more damage than making it more appealing.
Yeah, I'm hoping that some of our audience will know about this already, but the Total Jobs Group gender decoder that you can drop your advert in to, it's free, it's online, just TJG gender decoder, and it highlights the male or female balance on it, and that's a really helpful tool. It's absolutely free to counter exactly what you're talking about, those kind of rock stars or target orientated, those kind of things that might be a little bit of a turn off to a female audience. Talking of turn offs, there's a question here about what would you do, have you done during interviews to ensure a junior will work out. So I think one of the most important things when we're talking, if we're talking junior, it's probably going to be Gen Z, and they are very, very different in profile and their demands to millennials. When you consider that it's one generation, but it has changed quite radically. One of the key points from some of our other research is that 90% of decision makers have said they've been asked by interviewees rather, what their vision, what their mission, company mission is, what their corporate and social responsibility strategy is. So I think one of the key things for those juniors is to really get that, make sure your interviewers are up to scratch with not only what their project is about, but how that feeds the wider company, and then how that company feeds the wider kind of purpose of that company within the social environment. And I think there's certainly caught traction in over the COVID period, looking after people. I think we're seeing that drift away slightly. But I think that's a really important thing. And then probably the other key thing is, once you get them through that interview, is really involving them in real stuff once they're inside a business, and actually have tangible things that they are achieving, maybe not in their first 2 weeks of induction or something like that, but very quickly afterwards. Because if you get somebody that's a real go-getter and you kind of put them on the in the slow lane for a year, chances are they won't even get to the year, because it's not exciting enough for them. They're driven. They want to get somewhere. That's certainly what the evidence is saying, and make something actually tangible at the end of their days, weeks, and months at work quite early on. So I think getting them involved, obviously there's stuff like buddies and things like that, and getting them included in as many networks that you may have as an employee, getting them embedded is really important. But I think those are important things. I don't know if Kim, Zoe, anything to add to that? Any car crash incidents, Kim, of somebody coming into something and like, oh no, as soon as I walked through the door, I knew it was wrong.
One of my biggest pet peeves with just the interview process in general is making someone do a whiteboard tech test.
Okay.
Why? I don't write code on a whiteboard. I Google stuff as a developer. Like I'm not gonna know. I think it's fine to get someone to brainstorm ideas out on a whiteboard and talk about ideas and stuff. That is where I think it's extremely valuable, and it's those things that put people off wanting to come into the it's those horror stories that scare people, because people coming into the industry, they go, well, I don't want to do that whiteboard tech test, and I don't get why companies do it, because I don't write code on a whiteboard day to day. I'm doing it on a computer where I may have a plugin that flags if I've got a typo, or I've got Google where I search stuff all the time because I do forget stuff. That's just a pet peeve of mine.
I think that's really interesting though, because we myself and Zoe wouldn't be inside it to that level and understand that. But if a company gets known for doing it, or a particular manager gets known for doing it, chances are one interviewee will tell a few other people, and we know the power of social media these days as well. So
and if you just have a bad interview in general, if I have a bad interview and I'm like, oh, that person was really mean, I'm going to tell my friends, because I don't want them to go through the same thing that I've just gone through. And particularly as a female software engineer, and a lot of other minorities as well, we talk about companies, we talk about our experiences. And if someone has had a bad experience, whether it's at the interview or during the interview, if it's at the company, I'm going to tell another female developer, oh, by the way, be aware that this might happen, or just to let you know, this was my experience. Or I'll say, oh, I heard you worked there, I'm going for an interview, what's it like? And we talk, and you it's not just about getting someone through the interview process and giving them the job. It's also about what happens when that person is in the job, creating that safe space for them. And I, going back to the original question, what you said, I think people are more cautious of their impact in the world. And, I've got 7 nieces and nephews, and I particularly think of my 15-year-old niece, who is so aware of everything going on that she knows she wants to go into a career. She's still figuring it out, but she knows she wants to go into a career that has an impact, where she knows that this thing that she's doing for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks of the year, that she's having that impact. And I think exactly like you said, like whoever's doing the interview, clue them up, because people will ask, you know, and people also ask, what's your company doing for diversity in tech? Like, not just listing the job board
Yeah.
on CoBar, but like, what are you actually doing to
Yep.
ensure that your teams are diverse? So make sure that the people interviewing are all clued up on this stuff, because if I ask it in an interview and you're not able to tell me, then I'd be like, actually, this isn't really somewhere I probably want to work, because it could put a really good candidate off wanting to work there.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think the other piece on that is kind of demonstrating representation through that hiring process.
Yeah,
I once interviewed at a company where I turned up at the office. Everyone that was on my interview panel was male, and they walked me across the sales floor, and I didn't see a single woman. And by the time I sat down at the beginning of the interview, I had already decided I wasn't taking the job,
yeah,
because I literally did not see any single person that was not male and white. And
yeah,
so for me, that was the absolute killer, right? And you can only do that where those people are already in your business. It can be a bit chicken and egg for some organizations, but even just signposting that and saying, look, we know this is an issue,
yeah.
and we're working on it, and this is what our plan is, I think makes a huge difference there as well.
Yep.
Monzo did a really amazing, I don't think they've done it in recent years, I think it was about 2 years ago. They had a really amazing like diversity report, where their diversity and inclusion manager Sherry put together the report of the employees at Monzo, and they were really open about, okay, well, this area we know is really weak, and this is what we're going to work on in, I think their report was in 2019. They may have released one since, but I know she no longer works there. But they were like, right, in 2020, this is our goal to solve this problem. So again, if I'm joining the tech team as, say, the first female, I know there's a problem, but I've been made aware this is what they're going to do. This is what they're doing to solve that problem. So exactly like you said, like, be honest about it, be vulnerable about it. And that's scary, you know. Humans, we don't always like necessarily being vulnerable. So I can imagine being a company and being a bit more vulnerable is also scary. But say, we know there's a problem. Here is what we are doing to solve that problem. We are partnering with this company. We're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. And then I'll go, okay, I'm happy to come on board and work with them and help them, because I know there's a plan and I know I've got the backing. And that's key as well. Like, I know I've got the backing of people that we're going to solve this problem together, and that would make me be okay with being, say, the first female engineer on their tech team.
That's a good point. And I think that yes, it's got to be tangible, but I think highlighting that within your career site in terms of, yes, we are advocates of hashtag Tech She Can, Tech UK, or Tech Talent Charter.
Yeah,
Tech Talent Charter in particular, that draws anonymous data from all of its signatories and gives that back to those signatories in terms of what the current market is saying in terms of inclusion, and what Tech Talent Charter signatories are actually, and they are outperforming it. And I think that that's due to, yes, they've got some focus on it, but also they're taking some advice from the group that is Tech Talent Charter as well. So I really recommend those two. So we're doing really well on talking a lot, but not so good at getting through the questions. Again, my fault. So this might be a quick answer, but remember, this is written by a member of the audience. I don't think it's from Twitter. But as a company who prefers staff to be in the office, how do you find retaining staff with the pressures of home working roles? So how do you do it? How do you entice people to work full time from the office? I said it might be a quick answer because it might just be a, well, good luck, or
I don't think, you know, there are going to be people that want to work from an office, and that's probably going to be the person that you're going to hire. You know, if
Yep.
so like I said, people have had a taste of working from home. If someone is really adamant they want to work from home, you're probably not going to end up hiring that person. But there are tons of people I know who are absolutely thrilled to be back in an office, and they never want to work from home again, and that will be the person that you end up hiring.
So accept that you are not going to convince people, and that you might have to pay a little bit of extra to stand out from the crowd.
Yes.
Which I'm sure Twitter would be able to do that if it was Twitter that. It probably was. I can't imagine Elon Musk attending.
Oh,
But,
was that Zoe?
It goes both ways, because I'm someone who enjoys probably being in the office a couple of days a week, and I would never take a role that was fully remote. So
Yeah.
I think it's about being really clear and really transparent. as early in the process as possible about what's in scope and what's not in scope.
Yeah.
Where we've seen some kind of horror stories, and not naming any names, but we've seen organisations, for example, saying, well, it's fully remote for your probation, and then we'll decide after your probation if it's office based or not, for example. And I mean, attracting people to those roles is hugely challenging. We've had that conversation with them, but also retaining those people on the longer term is the challenge. So I think it's about being really open and really transparent about, this is where we're at the minute, and maybe you haven't actually fully figured it out, and being clear about that as well, that this might change, because I think wherever on that line people are, they're pretty firmly stuck into their part of the line, right? From fully remote to fully office based.
Good. This is a tricky question, I think, Zoe, so I'll give it to you. How do you predict the tech sector to change within the public sector?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think what we see the public sector doing a lot more, from a tech perspective, is focusing a lot more on benefits than on salary. So when you look at the flexibility, of course, that there is from a kind of salary and a comp and benefits perspective, there's obviously significantly less flexibility where you're operating in that kind of banded and public environment. But what we have seen, as I say, is that really leaning deeply on flexibility. For example, we've seen a large shift as well. I mean, we've all seen the news right across kind of Twitter and Meta and Made, and I think some other organisations. We're seeing again a real reshuffle and a recycle of talent that's going across the market. And the biggest piece that we're actually seeing, which is swinging the tide back in favour of tech in the public sector, actually, is we're seeing a shift once more of the contractor base towards perm roles. And I think we can expect to see that increasingly happening as the UK in particular, moves into to muddy or uncertain economic waters. We're seeing that trend moving back towards perm. And of course, we've got IR35 looming on the horizon once again. That's a bit challenging, but I think it's that that balance across, yes, tech in the public sector, but the public sector is a challenging place in terms of perception, right? So we've all seen in the news over the last 12 months the arguments about where people need to be based, people being back into the office. I think it's actually almost, again, and not to give the same answer, but having that really, really honest conversation to say, do you know what, working in tech in the public sector isn't all that different from working in tech anywhere else. In terms of what you're actually doing, it's taking that skills based approach and almost trying to strip away some of that perception element, and really playing on the benefits side of things, and really playing on the stability side of things, right? The public sector is not going anywhere. So
And that
yeah,
good work as well that's been done in the community, that CSR
yeah,
piece is the
yeah,
natural go-to, I'd imagine, for public sector, isn't it?
yeah.
So this is another heavyweight one, but I'll try and tackle this myself. How do you see a hyperinflation economic crash affecting the tech recruitment market? So a lovely thought on a rainy Tuesday in London. But so I think definitely we've already started to see some fallout from this. Twitter, was it 25% of their staff? Facebook, 13%, was it 10,000? Something along those lines. And when you read headlines like big tech job losses, I think you have to remember that big tech have both got capitals, and they're talking about the massive investments that were being done over the last 10 years, and they're having a kind of correction. Yes, there are people that are going to lose their jobs, and that's always a bad thing. However, I do see it as an opportunity for some companies that are still recruiting or still desperately trying to top up in areas and teams that have long been understaffed. And if they have that chance, maybe have a little bit of an opportunity to look at a slightly inflated market with a few more candidates on the market. I mean, obviously, all 10,000 aren't going to be in London or anything like that from Facebook, etc. But I do see that is an opportunity. Now, if it goes to the unprecedented 2-3 years of recession, then I don't think anybody knows, and that's certainly not something we want to even think about, because that's going to present all sorts of problems in beyond tech. But I think if it's at that kind of early to middling point of that scale, then it gives a chance for a lot of companies that have really struggled to fill all their roles to really kind of complete teams, get those projects moving, get those projects maybe finished a little bit quicker than they expected. Zoe, I'll ask you about the market outlook for the next 6 months, which was another question, but I suppose undoubtedly involving some of that cost of living, inflation, etc., etc. So, what do you think for the next 6 months?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think that there's lots of lots of different stories out there in the media, and a lot of them are quite conflicting, actually, in terms of what we're seeing. So we know the UK is set to be the only country in the developed world to have lower employment levels than pre-pandemic, which, of course, while not tech specific, has an implication across the entirety of the market there. As I say, there's that kind of interesting dynamic where candidates are moving more towards permanent roles as well. But on the flip side of that, what we're seeing is there was a report, I think, from the REC and KPMG a couple of days ago that we've seen the first kind of real-time drop in permanent job placement. So you've got candidates moving over to the permanent side, while organizations are very much trying to hedge their bets in their own way, and pushing things to more kind of contractor base and more short-term places here. But I think what we're kind of going to see over the next 6 months is a rebalancing of priorities after the pandemic, back, not saying the whole way back, but more back to more traditional, quote unquote, ways of thinking, because where we've got that economic uncertainty, where we're seeing employers already starting to say, do you know what, I'm actually just going to wait till the other side of Christmas now, see what's going on, see how the market starts to settle, see which way the dial moves. I think we're going to see that flip back to a very much a recruiter led market, and we're going to see similar behaviors that we would have seen maybe in 2018, 2019, but with just a tighter talent pool that's being competed over. That's my personal take on it.
Okay, and at that point, I will mention we did get a couple of questions on IR35, but even in 3 weeks, 3 weeks, a month is a long time in politics, and we've seen two different governments, very different mentalities. I think from what you're talking about, Zoe, a slackening of that would be great in terms of flexibility for UK companies, but that remains to be seen. And I think we'll find out Thursday on if there's anything. And so I'm not going to answer those in any depth until we really know what's happening, and then we potentially have somebody in the pipeline to help us with that, and certainly more of an expert on the IR35 side. So apologies if you wrote that question, but it would be ludicrous for us to pretend to answer it, given the up and down nature of what's actually happening. Kimberley, when's the best time of the year for IT firms to start hiring? Is there a seasonal thing that you've seen on this? Is it like graduate recruitment, or?
I think the biggest mistake often companies make is wait until they are hiring to look for people, because you can build up a really good reputation prior to that, so that when your job ad goes out, you get an influx of people coming. So if you know that you're going to be hiring in the next 12 to 24 months, start doing that work now. Particularly if you're looking to hire diverse talent, which you should be. But one of the things we do is when we do partnerships with companies, like, go out and start connecting with these communities, start to put your name out there as a company that's working with great technology. Get some of your team, maybe speaking at conferences about the software that you're doing. I've seen some amazing talks from developers on gov.uk about accessibility on their website and how they do it, and some of the testing that they do. And so I know now that gov.uk, and if you work for, like, say, GDS, then they care about accessibility, and that's potentially somewhere I want to work. So if I see a job ad, I'll go, oh, that looks interesting. So, and that's one of the biggest mistakes I see, is that people come to us and they go, we need someone in 3 weeks. Yep. And then they just expect themselves to get an influx of talent when they've not really done much more of that back work. And so start doing the work now, so that when your job ad is out there, people come and you've already got that really great reputation of a company that people want to work for.
Yeah, I think the way that tech is different to a lot of other sectors are out there is the networking element and the community element. There are not many sectors in the UK where actually a decent proportion of people are hired by word of mouth anymore, but tech very much falls into that bracket. So when you look at the volume of referral rates, we were sitting with a customer the other day, and they had something, it was like 85% of the internal company referrals they'd had were within their tech department, because people know each other, they stay in touch with each other, and it's that element, right? Of what you get in tech that you don't necessarily get in a lot of other industries. You get it in industries like FMCG, for example, consumer products, but it's actually almost, a company puts their adverts live and all of a sudden the WhatsApp groups are twittering saying, have you seen, actually they've just put these roles live, and it's like you say, it's that pre-work, right? That there's an excitement and people are waiting for that to happen, as opposed to kind of backpedaling when it does happen, and trying to find that talent that's probably been, as you said right at the beginning, right, keeping their eye on the market all of the time, and seeing what employers are saying and how they're behaving when the spotlight isn't on them. Because I think that speaks volumes as well.
So many developers I know have changed job when they weren't even looking. And we spoke about that at the beginning, that if the company that I'm working at is hiring, I'm going to tell my friends, because I want to work with them. I'm going to try and poach them and be like, oh, by the way, we're hiring, like our benefits are better, the salary's better, there is flexibility, you can, all of this stuff. And so many people I know change jobs when they're not actually looking for a job. And I also think it's key, we were talking about, the hiring process, and, I briefly mentioned on, actually people then often forget about what happens when you are in the job. It's why also creating a great workspace is important, because exactly like you said, Zoe, like so many people get jobs through word of mouth. And so if you're creating a great work environment, people are going to talk and tell their friends. And again, it's all about building up that reputation so that when you are then hiring, the people will come.
I saw this done really well at, funny enough, it was another in-house recruitment event last year, I think it was, and it was IBM showcasing their social media strategy, which is ongoing. Now, obviously, we're not all IBM and global companies and have a continual requirement, but I think that being social media, it's scalable. I do think it's probably worth involving some agencies that specialize in it, so it has a bit of quality, but a series of videos, a day in the life of, just to whet people's appetite. And do you know what, that they damn well haven't got any requirements at the moment, but I'd love to work for them, because that looks like the kind of place I'd like to work. It gives you a better chance. So I think that's a really good point, Kim, in terms of April the 1st, because that's when the budgets come out on. But I don't think it's like that. And I think, as you say, it is continual, and it is taking advantage of those moments when somebody's just had a bad week and happens to see your video. Oh, and then there's an actual requirement the next week. Do you know what? I'm going to go for that, because that really interested me. So I'm just going to flash through this question, because what and you'll laugh when I give you the question, but what is the trending in hiring in quantum information science? So I think people might have overestimated my my knowledge of this area, and I think, to be fair, it is a fledgling area, and the work I've looked into, it says, I think there was, when interviewed, I think 95% of all clients recruiting for quantum science in the quantum science area expected their new employees, to learn on the job. So there's almost an acceptance that this is a variety of skills that's coming together. I mean, I read about AI, data science, physicists. I mean, baffling to me, but I think the point that I would say is this is so fledgling that do not advertise something as quantum science on the job title necessarily, but do you have these kind of skills, because we might be able to take you into the quantum science or quantum computing environment with this kind of training. And so that's the advice I would give in that area. And there are beginning to quantum computing roles are beginning to be advertised, but I would make very clear, going back to our qualification piece, this is not must have 15 years experience in quantum computing. Impossible.
I've seen that. I see that in. I think I saw that. I saw something like that on a job ad where, like, I think it was something like React, which hasn't been around that long in terms of the tech thing. And this job ad said, 5 years of React experience required. And then someone responded saying React hasn't even been out for 5 years.
Yeah. So don't get caught out on that, and have some humility that you're not going to get a finished article.
Yeah.
So I'll try and answer, not to be clever, but I'll try and answer two questions, because there was what will be the most used method of recruitment in 23-24, and what the next generation methodology for tech recruitment. So my immediate response to both of these questions was, I think tech recruitment is vulnerable to that kind of new and shiny thing that, something does something new. Well, it's in tech, so maybe that's a really good thing to jump on. First of all, I would double check that your existing systems run smoothly before you start bolting on anything to really, you know, supercharge them. Make sure your basic engine works. So that would be my first piece of advice. Talking about 23-24 and what the next generation methodologies, I think there is a huge opportunity within the AI market as AI increases. And what do I mean about opportunity? I mean quality over quantity. So really trimming down the amount of time that an applicant takes to find the right role for them themselves, then being really engaged in that whole process. And I think that certainly job boards, next generation job entities can really make some use of this. There's plenty of ATSIs out there that I think can help, but make sure it's fit for purpose. So I think AI is going to be the big thing of advances that we see, but also and this is, does lead me to a plug on something that we have, but I think also the visual language, video recruitment is still waiting to catch fire, but I think it is progressing as it intermeshes with social media. And I expressed the point recruitment, not video interviewing, but video recruitment. So a whole kind of ecosystem of the recruitment process of using video. We in StepStone have Cameo, but that could be used for a video, augmenting an advert with video, shortlisting candidates, but also a variety of ways of interviewing. It's also crucially GDPR compliant, and people that are interviewing and recording Teams sessions or Zoom sessions, the GDPR compliance is critical, because you could get caught out there. So I think video's certainly got some way to go in terms of take up, but I think the tools are there. AI, I think that there's huge possibilities, but I think the tools are evolving as we speak. I mean, we have Maya, which is an emotional AI tool that's utilized with WhatsApp and text. So it will start asking you questions in a very conversational manner, and try and trim down exactly what you're looking for, rather than a list of 25 roles that actually only the first two really hit your buttons. But so they're the areas that I think we will see advancing over the next couple of years. But get the basics right first, and don't try and bolt on stuff that simply isn't working in the first place. So how best to manage high dropout rates from tech candidates in spite of the employer having a strong brand and proposition? Zoe, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it dovetails in really nicely with a lot of what we've talked about already. It's the biggest kind of factor that we're seeing at the moment in dropout. Well, there's two really. One is around obviously, we know candidates are fielding multiple offers, and they're deliberately getting multiple offers so that they've got that kind of leverage, that negotiating power. You said, candidates are being relatively rigid in terms of certain elements like flexible working and what they are, and they aren't willing to accept. And what we see is one of the biggest factors here really is about transparency. So how clear, number one, how clear are you from the beginning about what is and isn't in scope for that role, for your organization, for that individual, but also being really clear about what you have and you haven't figured out. So as opposed to kind of, coming with this fully polished role where maybe actually that's not the reality of the role, and they're going to get in and find that maybe the team isn't as embedded within the organization, or maybe the tech stack isn't quite as decided as it was kind of insinuated beforehand. What we're really seeing is just absolute transparency and absolute clarity about what is and isn't kind of in scope for those roles, and what decisions haven't been made, is what's keeping tech candidates on the line, as opposed to dropping out. Because actually, as soon as you're compared to another organization who maybe can answer those questions, or has a much more compelling or believable answer to a lot of those questions, that from a risk appetite, changing a job, moving jobs is probably one of the biggest decisions beyond, who you decide to love, is one of the biggest decisions that you make as a person. And so people's risk appetites are going to push them in the direction of stability, rather than prioritizing a shiny new project or a shiny logo. I think that's the real key, is just kind of being open and honest from as early in the process as you physically can.
Yeah, I think it's a really overused word, but it's overused because it does nail it. But that authenticity piece.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
I'm sure Kim has probably had this experience, if not heard of it. You walk into a company and you're going to be the only woman on the team, and they tell you that for this team of 10, they're going to be 50% women by the end of the year. Right? That's
Yeah.
not neither believable nor probably achievable. And so it's kind of actually like just not selling it too much, just being completely honest. I think across every single type of person, right, is going to go a long way, because it's, as you say, overused. But that as soon as people smell that something's kind of inauthentic, it makes them question everything they've heard, not just that single piece of information.
Yeah. Which it also goes back to what we were saying about being vulnerable, about, don't lie, don't, like, exactly like you said, like, we will, like, as, if I'm interviewing, like, I will, smell the crap, like, if there's something that's not working, be honest about it, because I will respect you more. And it goes both ways, when I'm being interviewed, and if I'm asked a technical question, you will know if I don't know the answer, because I'm waffling and I'm talking crap. And if I said to you, do you know what, actually, I don't know, but I'd Google this, you would have more respect for me if I said, I don't know, but I would Google this. And that, it works both ways, exactly like you were saying.
Unless it's your
Yeah,
answer for every question, Kim.
yes. I mean, if I don't know anything, then
Yeah,
but like, if there is, one question in the technical part that I don't know, and there's nothing worse, than working with a ton of developers who are just talking a load of crap all the time, so like just be honest with like the stuff that you don't know, or the stuff inside the company that isn't working, and just say, but we're doing this to fix that.
Yeah.
So on that honesty piece, if you don't allow remote working, then be really upfront about it.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a company that actually really found it difficult to recruit, but had forgotten to accentuate how family oriented they were. They had kind of 2 family days every year where the entire company's families are invited to. I think they had Friday afternoons off. But the flip side of that was there is no remote work. It's everybody in the office, but at least people know what they're going into, and then you don't get the you tried to pull the wool over my eyes.
Yeah. I was listening to I don't know if anyone listens to the podcast Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett, and he's on Dragon's Den, and he's like really good. And actually, the person he was interviewing was the founder of Strava, and they were having a really lengthy conversation about that. And Stephen was like, I'm really against working from home. And the Strava guy was like, but why? Like, and they were having this really amazing conversation about it, and whether you're for or against it or not, like Stephen was like, no, I want people in the office every day, because that's how I think the best work is done. And whether you agree with that or not, it's fine. But he's being 100% honest. He's like, the people working for me, I want them in the office. And so if you're someone who likes to work remotely, don't apply for a job working for him, because he's not going to let you work remote. And so even though I don't agree with that, I respect that honesty, and I'm aware that that's his viewpoint, and he's being 100% honest from the start that he hated it during the pandemic, and that's how he wants his companies to be.
Great.
So
listen, we are racing towards the hour mark. I'm going to try and be disciplined on this. So a short and concise answer on the biggest challenges business are currently facing, and let's remove cost of living crisis, inflation, and the dreadful war in Ukraine. But I'm going to go first, so I might steal everybody's thunder. So I think it's going to go back, and this is why you reminded me of it, actually, Kim, was the whole battle for remote versus in the office. I think that's going to be the biggest conflict within businesses in the UK for 2023. Do we suddenly have the control and say, no, there's a recession on, you want your job, you're back in the office, or do we understand that there's loads and loads of benefits? And I'm going to have to listen to that podcast now. That going forward, that's a great thing to do. So after stealing probably the easiest answer, Zoe, what do you reckon?
I'm going to give a cop-out answer, but it is my actual answer. I think, taking away the cost of living and the war in Ukraine and all of those pieces, I think actually where people work, how they have to work. So that flexibility piece from a location and from an hours and from a day's perspective, and how that balances with how affordable their life is probably going to be one of the only priorities that people have as they move into the next year, right? Because actually, once you get to a situation where we know, I think it's 49% of UK workers have stated they're living payslip to payslip. 37% of UK workers have said that they feel they no longer earn enough to cover their cost of living. Once you get to that kind of conversation, I think a lot of this other stuff kind of goes out the window to a certain extent because people need to kind of support themselves, support their family, and all of those pieces. So I don't know that there will be a personally. I don't know that I see there being a kind of mega trend beyond where that flexibility piece and the compensation and benefits piece, if I'm honest, going into next year.
I will give a different answer very, very quickly. Those would have been my two answers, and actually, Dominic, I think that would have been my answer. But for the sake of saying something different, and because of my background with COBAR, I think hiring diverse talent is hard, and you've got to put the work in, and it doesn't come easy. But if it's done right, and if you've got a big team of people, you've got the support of people, diverse teams are the most successful teams, and that there's so many stats around that. But it is hard to do that. Hiring diverse talent, whether it's in tech or any other field, is hard work. So that will be my answer.
Really,
but that
it's a
would
really
have been
good
my
point.
answer. But for the sake of saying something different, but put the work in. Connect with communities. That's the key. Like we said, word of mouth is the absolute key to getting roles. So connect with communities. And I'm not just saying that because I'm from COBA. There are tons of other amazing organizations out there doing work in tech. Code your future, coding back females, code first girls. There are tons out there also doing amazing work. Connect with those communities, build those relationships, and you will have the most successful teams, hands down, without that. There are stats, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but we all know diverse teams are the best teams. So I will say that for the sake of being different.
No, I think it's a really important point because it must not get relegated to some kind of fashionable thing that was, it's so 2021, 22. Or it's ongoing. It's got to be. So it's
And
not
the
like
work
COVID,
is
which
never
will
done.
eventually disappear.
Yeah.
So I absolutely agree. Last question for you, Kim. Do you think the demand for Azure is likely to increase salaries further?
No,
No.
I don't think so.
Do you think it's topped out?
Yeah, I mean, it's never something I've seeked out, and it's not something that I am aware that people will go, oh, I must learn this because my salary will be higher. If you've got it, it's a benefit, but I wouldn't make it something that's key.
Core. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think just kind of answering that I saw at the chat, I think what we've seen when you look at let's take software developer salaries over the last rolling 12 months, right? The period kind of September of last year to September of this year, they've risen across the board by about 11%. And I think what is pushing up some of those salaries is lots of different specific skill sets. So Azure being one of them, AWS being one of them, various coding languages being other. But I don't think I agree with you, Kim, in terms of Azure specifically. I don't think that has that kind of coverall impact.
Oh, got a visitor.
Hi.
On that note, listen, it just remains to me to say a huge thank you to Zoe and Kim. Zoe, as usual, some great insights. Kim, some enormous insights that Zoe and I simply wouldn't be able to understand or have experience of in terms of the dreaded whiteboard experience. Absolutely phenomenal. We will be, if you've enjoyed this, then we will be running another LinkedIn Live, so long as this one went okay, in early December, looking at Universum's research. Universum, employer value proposition company, part of the StepStone stable, but some fascinating stuff on what different generations are looking at. Sorry, it's actually on the 30th of November. So look out for that. It will be Steve Ward, myself, and Tony JJ discussing that in a lot more depth. I hope you enjoyed today. Thanks for sticking with it. Or thanks for watching the video, in which case it was probably not the success we wanted, but we've managed to video you the product of it. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, Zoe.